Hi, welcome to the UPS store.
Yeah, I'd like to ship this package.
Great, I can help you with that and every other ing.
Did you just say every other ing?
Printing, packing, copying, faxing, freighting, any ing your small business needs.
Shredding.
Yep.
Mailboxing.
Uh-huh.
Notarizing?
That too.
Wow, that's really some ing.
Now you're getting it.
The UPS Store. Every ing for small business. And of course, shipping. The UPS Store franchise locations are independently owned and operated. Services, pricing, and hours may vary. See Center for details.
This is a CBC podcast.
A university leaves its mark on most students, but our next guest has truly left a mark on his university. Michael Samakeai is a student from Zambia who recently graduated from the University of Toronto. Michael is also deaf, and during his time at school, he introduced scores of other students to sign language and deaf culture. He started U of T's ASL Club and pushed for the first course on American Sign Language, which is going to be offered this winter. Michael spoke with us earlier this week over video chat. David Kalenda, his sign language interpreter, listened to my questions and then he interpreted them to Michael, who signed back.
Good morning. How are you? I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to have you with us. First off, congratulations. How are you feeling?
Wow. Well, I just can't believe that time has gone by so fast. The undergrad was 4 years, but it just seemed like it just flew by. And I was very, very happy to be at U of T, and it was very impactful for me. So I'm very happy that I'm graduated, but I'm very sad that it's all over with.
Michael, tell us, what was your experience at the University of Toronto like?
Looking back on it, it was challenging at first. I mean, arriving to a different country. It was new for me just to settle down, get my bearings, and just kind of navigate the entire campus. So that was, well, not just the campus, but the city. And I'm used to sign language, Zambian sign language. So once I first arrived, I had to learn ASL, which is quite different than Zambian sign language. But being a deaf individual, it comes easy. So as I look back on it, it was really difficult at first. But just being optimistic, just the personality that I have, I just kind of took on that challenge, and I wanted to give something back to U of T. So I thought, why not ASL Club, sign language? Everyone wanted it. There was such a big demand for it.
For those who may be unfamiliar with sign language, can you describe for us the differences between Zambian sign language and American Sign Language?
Sure. Well, I mean, every country has its own sign language. I think that's the myth. People just assume it's universal. But it's just the same as spoken languages. Every country has a different spoken language, and that spoken language kind of influences and dictates what that sign language is going to be in that country. For example, in ASL, I know Australian Sign Language, American Sign Language, and a slew of other African nation sign languages. But when you go to a different country and you're traveling, there's a gestural part of it, but and you could communicate that way. But sign language is quite different in one country than the other. ASL is quite different than Zambian Sign Language. I mean, for the viewers, they can't see me now, but ASL uses finger spelling, which is one hand dominant, so you spell out the words on one hand. But in other countries, they use two hands to spell out certain words. So depending on what country you're visiting, they have their own distinct sign language. So there are many, many different variations.
Given that difference, and I think you make a very good point that a lot of people may be quite naive to the diversity of sign language that exists, but given the differences that you've just explained, what was it like trying to learn ASL?
Well, it's a good question. I picked it up quite quickly, I would have to say, because there's similarities as well. I should point that out in Zambian Sign Language and American Sign Language. So they kind of piggyback on one another here and there. So when I came here, first it was challenging. Yes, it's a completely different language, but it's very demonstrative. There's a lot of facial gestures. So once you get the nuances of American Sign Language, it took some time, but after that, you pick it up quite quickly. I did, at least.
It's one thing to learn a new language in a new city, in a new country, but what inspired you to start your own ASL and Deaf Culture Club at the university once you were here?
Well, once I arrived on campus, well, let me backtrack for a little bit. Before I actually arrived on campus, I was very nervous. The anxiety was pretty high. I didn't know how I'm going to communicate with certain students and my peers. And I said, okay, just go for it. Just see how people are, whether they're receptive to me or not. And I noticed that during my undergrad, there was a few deaf other students that I met, some students that were doing their masters. But on the whole, there was not many deaf students on campus. And there, a lot of people, they were so receptive to me. So they approached me, and I just noticed that the numbers are more and more people kind of approached me and were so welcoming and wanted to learn sign language, because maybe it was the novelty of meeting a deaf person for the first time. But I thought, okay, there is this huge demand, and I can't obviously teach everyone, individually. So why not have a one-stop shop? So that's kind of where the idea percolated, and it was based out of just popularity. Like, a lot of people, just the demand was so high, like everyone was on board with this idea. So when I introduced the idea, people just were all for it, and everyone was like, okay, let's do this. And it was more of a social activity as opposed to a classroom setting. So it kind of gave people, there was no parameters. Everyone was just free to socialize and by any means necessary. So it really got the barriers down. A lot of people were just wanted to get, like, slowly they would pick up the alphabet, and then they wanted to know a little bit more about deaf culture. And then that led to more and more. It just piqued interest. And some people just got really involved with the deaf community after that. So it was a nice introduction to the...
As I mentioned, you also advocated for an American Sign Language course at the university, which was successful. How does it feel knowing that course is going to take place this winter?
Well, I'm very proud of it. It took many, many years in the making. It was my entire time as an undergrad. The idea kind of came, and then we thought, let's make this completely something formal, something that stays on campus. And again, it goes back to, there was so much interest, and having a course there it just seemed kind of common sense to have a course because there's so much interest. And advocating, I had, the university was very supportive and endorsed that idea, but it had to go through all the channels to get approved. And with the support of the university student union, the students themselves advocating, just showing that there is that interest, the faculty, they were on board with it and they endorsed it. So from the inception of that idea, I think it never had any kind of naysayers. Everyone was on board. So it was nice to see it come from its incipient early progression to having it actually this semester, seeing like that's going to be my legacy. I kind of pioneered that. So whether that leads to other courses, maybe they will extend that, the levels in that course, who knows? But knowing that it was something that I started, and it's kind of like my brainchild, my little baby, that I could see it grow throughout the years. It's wonderful to see that.
And Michael, now that you've graduated, what's next?
Well, graduation is in the past. I think this year, I don't know, some people call it a gap year or a break year. I think I'm going to take some time just to kind of focus on myself with COVID and everything that's been kind of, it's been a roller coaster emotional year. But next year, I do plan on going back to school, the academic setting, and I want to become the first deaf lawyer. So law school is in the cards. And I'm really happy to just kind of further my education. That's the plan.
Michael, such a pleasure to get the chance to speak with you this morning. Thank you so much.
And thank you. I'm happy, and thank you for inviting me on the show. Thank you so much.
Michael Samakeai is a recent graduate from the University of Toronto with a degree in political science, and we spoke with the help of his sign language interpreter, David Kalenda.
Printing, packing, faxing. The UPS Store can do any ing and every ing for small business. And of course, shipping.
Wow, that's really some ing.
The UPS Store. The UPS Store franchise locations are independently owned and operated. Services, pricing, and hours may vary. See Center for details.
During the Trump presidency, many people spoke about losing a shared sense of truth. Now, a new book looks at the aftermath of that era and how facts are being undermined by both the right and the left. Jonathan Rauch is a Washington, D.C. journalist, contributor to The Atlantic magazine, and a longtime gay rights advocate. His latest title is called The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. And our book's columnist Tara Henley recently had the chance to speak with him about it.
Hi, Jason.
So let's start with defining terms here. What exactly is the Constitution of Knowledge?
So this is basically liberalism. Not liberalism in the sense of leftist politics, but liberalism as a set of values and beliefs shared by people on the left and the right. This is things like due process, open inquiry, free speech, a free press. But let's hear how Jonathan Rauch sets this up.
Every society needs a way to stay in touch with reality, and that turns out to be really, really hard. And most societies have done that by dividing into sects and then appointing a priest or a politburo or a prince to decide what's right. And then they tend to go to war with each other and tend to kill people who disagree. It's just a terrible way to make knowledge. So Constitution of Knowledge comes along about, 300 years ago. Whole different idea. It says we're not going to have a ruler to decide what's true. We're going to have rules.
So those rules are the checks and balances, things that pit bias against bias and help us to determine fact. So a classic example of this is science and how science operates. Jonathan Rauch calls the people in the institutions involved in this the reality-based community, and there are 4 big areas here: academia, journalism, law, and government.
You mentioned threats to truth under Trump, and we've heard a lot in recent years about the problems caused by misinformation on the internet. What role does the far right play here?
So Jonathan Rauch does spend a fair bit of time unpacking both social media and the far right in this book. There are a number of strategies that the far right uses. Take a listen to this.
You can hijack attention by trolling. You can put out stuff that is so outrageous and so norm-busting and insulting, people feel that they must respond to it. You can use conspiracy theories to undermine this network by putting all this junk in there that people are attracted to. And then if they don't refute it, the junk spreads through the system. If they do refute it, then you're repeating it for them. You're actually helping them.
And Jonathan Rauch writes about Trump's main strategy. He calls this the fire hose of falsehood, or just flooding the public square with lies and half-truths and exaggerations. And media fact-checkers cannot keep up with this. And then people have no idea what is true anymore. And he believes that a lot of people aren't quite aware enough that this is happening.
And when you talk about threats from the left, what's happening there?
So what he's talking about with the far left is cancel culture. For many people who do not know this term, this is when a group of people, typically online, find speech objectionable and go after the speaker, looking to cancel things like employment and reputation. It's certainly not limited to the left, but it is a popular tactic on the far left at the moment. Now, there was initially a lot of debate about whether this phenomenon was even real. A lot of people viewed this as simply holding people to account. But in the last 6 months, the tide has turned on that conversation a bit, and we have seen countless respected thinkers speaking out about this and saying that it's doing damage to our culture. And Jonathan Rauch falls into that camp. He has an interesting point to make about that.
So the broader point is it's usually actually quite easy to tell the difference in practice between criticism and canceling, because criticism attacks an idea. So the great notion, the big breakthrough of the Constitution of Knowledge is we kill our hypotheses instead of each other. And that's new in human affairs. In most of our 200,000 years of history, if you were wrong, you got killed, you got ostracized, you got jailed. Well, in the reality-based community, the punishment for being wrong is you lose the argument. And that's because it's not the person that's attacked, it's the idea. Well, that means you have to be able to make mistakes without fearing that you're going to lose your job.
So what he's defending here is the premise that we should go after the idea and not the person, and that we have to be able to make mistakes.
Tara, what's at stake here? Is this a book we should be paying attention to right now?
It's a good question. What does this mean? Why does it matter? I do think, Jason, that it is a book we should be paying attention to. I started thinking about this because we just wrapped up Pride Month. And LGBTQ advocates have made significant headway in the past 2 decades. And here is an author who has lived through that era. And I guess I just wanted to ask him how much of the gains that have been made are attributable to the system of reality-based knowledge that he writes about, that he believes is under threat. Turns out a lot. And he started telling me a bit about his personal story.
I was born in 1960. And in the U.S., this was a time when in most states you could be arrested for loving the person you loved in the privacy of your own home. You could not work for the U.S. government. If you were discovered, you could be arrested. Your name would go in the paper. You'd lose your job the next day. We were reviled from the pulpits. We were condemned by the psychiatric profession as sick. I'm old enough to remember this stuff, but I'm also old enough to have learned from years of gay activism that the source of hate is not that most people get up every morning and say, who can I hate today? The source of hate is fear and ignorance.
And the solution to fear and ignorance, he says, is facts. So reality was this movement's greatest ally. And Jonathan Rauch points to a pivotal victory. That was the landmark Supreme Court decision in 1958 involving a gay magazine called One and ruling that its speech was protected. And so Jonathan Rauch says free speech was absolutely critical to the movement for LGBTQ rights.
We never had money. We never had, hate speech laws that said you can't say bad things about gay people. What we did have was better arguments and more persuasion. And every time the haters said hateful things, that helped us. Because we were able to hold that up and say, now compare that with what we're giving you, which is accurate information and love versus inaccurate information and hate. And that's the reason I'm married today. I've been married for 11 years to a man. I never thought I'd live to see that.
So just a really thought-provoking and timely book, Jason, and well worth a read.
Tara, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Tara Henley is our book's columnist. She was talking about American journalist Jonathan Rauch's new book, The Constitution of Knowledge in Defense of Truth.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.